I remember the sound of the fire. It wasn't like in the movies, nothing like those clean, dramatic flames that dance and crackle with purpose. This was different. It was a thick sound, heavy and suffocating, as if the very air itself was being torn apart, ripped at the seams by something ancient and hungry. That early morning, I woke to the phone ringing, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The voice on the other end was shaking when they told me the school was burning. My first thought flew to the children, their small faces flashing before my eyes in the dark, but then I remembered it was Sunday dawn. Nobody should have been there. The building should have been empty, silent, waiting for Monday's return. But she was there. I've been teaching for many years now, watched countless seasons change through classroom windows, seen children grow and leave and sometimes return with children of their own. But nothing, absolutely nothing, ever left me feeling as hollow and shattered as what happened that night. I was an elementary school teacher in a small school, the kind you find in the interior, where time moves slower and everyone knows everyone's name. The walls were peeling, revealing layers of old paint like geological strata of memory, and the roof made sounds when the wind blew, groaning and creaking like an old ship at sea. The girl's name was Clara. She was 6 years old, small for her age, with dark eyes that seemed too old for her face. She was the kind of child who spoke in whispers, as if afraid her voice might disturb something sacred in the air around her. She always carried the same blue pencil in her hand, clutched tight like a talisman, like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. I liked her because she drew all the time, constantly, compulsively. Sometimes I would let her continue even when it was time to copy from the board, when the other children were dutifully transcribing their lessons. There was something in her that needed to draw, something urgent and unexplainable. She had this calm way about her, this quietness that made other children overlook her, but she looked at things differently than the others. She looked at the world as if she could see something else hiding behind it, something the rest of us were blind to, some deeper truth written in invisible ink. The first drawing appeared on a Monday morning. I found it on her desk before she arrived, the paper still slightly damp from her grip. It was the school in flames, every detail rendered with disturbing accuracy. The building was identical, down to the cracked wall by the gate that we'd been meaning to fix for years, down to the 3 windows on the left that never quite closed properly. But in her drawing, fire was pouring out of every window, bright orange and red streaks that seemed to move, even though they were still. I thought it was curious, strange even, but I didn't give it much importance at first. Children draw what they see, what they dream, what frightens them in the night. Their imaginations are wild territories where reality and fantasy blur together like watercolors in rain. I convinced myself it must have been something she saw, maybe a movie on television or someone burning trash near her house, the flames reflected in her young eyes and translated onto paper. But looking back now, I wonder if I was just too afraid to see what was right in front of me, too comfortable in my certainty that the world made sense. The principal saw the drawing when she was making her rounds through the classrooms, and her face went pale. She immediately sent for Clara, calling her to the office with a voice that was trying to sound gentle, but came out strained. The girl came in with her head down, biting on that blue pencil of hers, her small shoulders hunched as if expecting punishment. When they asked her why she had drawn such a thing, why she would imagine our school burning, she looked up with those old eyes and said simply, clearly, without hesitation, "Because that's how it's going to be." The room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the clock ticking on the wall, counting down to something none of us could see yet. The principal gave a nervous smile, the kind adults give when they're trying to convince themselves that everything is fine, that children don't know things they shouldn't know. She told Clara gently but firmly not to draw these things anymore, that they were disturbing, inappropriate. Afterward, she called me into the hallway, her hand shaking slightly as she closed the door, and asked if I knew anything about the girl's home life, if there was something we should be worried about. I said no, she was just a child, and children have active imaginations. We both laughed, but the sound was uncomfortable, hollow, and it echoed wrong in that narrow corridor. We let it go, convinced ourselves it was nothing. But Clara didn't stop. Every week after that, there was a new drawing of the school burning, each one slightly different, but all sharing that same terrible clarity. Sometimes the fire was concentrated on the roof, flames licking up toward the sky like prayers or curses. Other times it consumed the doors, making exit impossible, trapping everyone inside. In the last one, I saw before everything happened, she had drawn the playground with all the equipment burning, the swings hanging limp and blackened, the slide melting like a Salvador Dali clock. I kept one of the drawings in my desk drawer, hidden beneath papers and old lesson plans. I'm still not sure why I did that. Maybe I felt sorry for her. Maybe some part of me knew I would need evidence later, proof that this really happened, that I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe I was just afraid, and keeping it close felt like having some control over whatever was coming. In the middle of all this, I began to notice that Clara was changing, becoming even more withdrawn than before. She would stand still for long periods, staring at the school windows from the playground, her eyes tracing something the rest of us couldn't see. Her focus was absolute, almost trance-like, as if she was watching a movie play out that only she had been given tickets to. One morning I arrived earlier than usual, and I found her sitting on the front steps, completely alone, in the grey dawn light. She was staring into the building through the glass doors, motionless as a statue. I asked if she was waiting for someone, her grandmother perhaps, but she answered no, her voice distant and dreamy. She said she was just watching the fire. I laughed, but it was a forced sound, brittle and false, and underneath it I felt something cold crawl up my spine, like frost spreading across a window. That night I told the principal again, more urgently this time, explaining what Clara had said, how she spoke about the fire, as if it was already happening, as if time was different for her than it was for us. The principal sighed, looking tired, and told me not to worry so much. She said that sometimes children invent stories to get attention, especially children who feel invisible or neglected at home. She promised to have a quiet word with Clara's grandmother. I wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that simple explanation and move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all missing something crucial, something hiding in plain sight. On Thursday, Clara made her final drawing, and when I saw it, my hands went cold. It was the school viewed from outside, the perspective of someone standing in the street looking at the building. Every detail was precise, photographic even, but there was something new this time, something that made my breath catch in my throat. Her name was written inside one of the classrooms, right in the center of the flames, the letters perfectly formed and deliberate. Clara. I remember the red crayon was worn down, almost to nothing, and she had pressed so hard that she'd nearly torn through the paper, going over and over the letters, as if she wanted them burned into the page, permanently, indelibly, like a brand or a signature. At the end of that day, as the other children were rushing out to meet their parents, she walked slowly to my desk, taking her time as if she had all the time in the world or no time at all. She handed me the drawing, her small fingers releasing it into mine, and said with perfect calm, "Teacher, it's finished now." I didn't understand what she meant by that, those strange final words. The way she said it felt like a completion, like the last sentence of a story being spoken aloud. I asked her, "Finished? What's finished, Clara?" But she only gave me a small smile, gap-toothed and somehow ancient, and walked away without another word, disappearing into the afternoon sunlight streaming through the doorway. Have you ever felt the weight of a moment you couldn't understand? A moment that only made sense too late, after everything had already happened and there was no going back to change it? Have you ever held someone's last message in your hands and not known it was goodbye? On Friday, the school had a problem with the electrical system. Lights flickered and dimmed throughout the day, humming with an irregular pulse that set everyone on edge. The electrician came in the afternoon, a man with weathered hands who'd been fixing things in our town for 30 years. He opened the panel, poked around with his tools, tutted and hummed to himself, then declared it resolved. Just some loose connections and old wiring that needed tightening. I even made a joke about it seeming like a bad omen, something out of a horror movie, but nobody laughed. The silence that followed felt heavy, prophetic. Saturday passed normally, uneventfully, the way Saturdays do in small towns. I went to the market, bought vegetables and bread, exchanged pleasantries with neighbors, came home and put everything away. That evening it rained, a soft, persistent rain that tapped against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. I went to bed early, exhausted from the week, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Then Sunday morning arrived with the phone's harsh ringing cutting through the silence, pulling me up from the depths of sleep into a nightmare I didn't know was waiting. When I got there, driving too fast through streets still wet from rain, there was nothing left to do, no rescue to attempt, no miracle to pray for. The fire had already done its work with terrible efficiency. It had destroyed the back section of the school, primarily the part where the cleaning woman lived in a small attached room, a makeshift home, that the school board had allowed her to use because she had nowhere else to go. She lived there with her granddaughter, with Clara. I remember seeing the firefighter, his face smudged with soot, explaining in a flat professional voice that the fire had started in an old wire behind an outlet in the bedroom. He said she was probably sleeping when it began, that the smoke would have taken her before the flames did, offering this as a kind of comfort, as if the manner of death mattered when a child was gone. I stood there frozen, staring at the blackened wall, at the places where paint had bubbled and peeled away to reveal the naked bones of the building. The smell of smoke was everywhere, soaking into my clothes, my hair, my lungs, a smell I would never fully wash away. It clung to everything like a ghost refusing to leave. Someone found her notebook in the rubble, the edges all burned and curled, the pages brittle with heat, and inside were all the drawings, a chronicle of prophecy that no one had believed. In that moment, standing there with ash falling like snow around me, I felt something that's difficult to put into words even now. It was fear, yes, but it was also guilt, crushing and absolute. It was the terrible understanding that I should have taken it seriously, that somewhere in those drawings was a cry for help I had been too blind or too scared to hear. I should have done something, anything, everything, but I didn't. And now she was gone. After the fire, I couldn't bring myself to go back to that school for days. The building stood there like a wounded thing half destroyed, waiting. The school was condemned, wrapped in official tape and silence, and the smell of burning lingered in the city's air for weeks, settling into clothes and curtains and the spaces between buildings like an unwelcome ghost that refused to move on. Even now, all these years later, when someone lights a bonfire on a cool evening or burns leaves in their yard, I feel that same nausea rising in my throat, that same sick twist in my stomach from that morning. The principal left a month after it happened. She came to me one afternoon, her eyes red and hollow, and said she didn't have the head to continue anymore, that every time she walked past that burned section, she saw Clara's face. The students were transferred to another school across town, scattered like seeds, their routines disrupted and rearranged, and I was left floating, unmoored, not knowing where to go or what to do with myself. I tried to follow my normal routine, tried to pretend that life could just continue as it had before, but it seemed like everything I saw, everywhere I looked, reminded me of her in ways both large and small. The blue pencil lying forgotten on a store counter, the front bench in church where she used to sit with her grandmother, the way sunlight came through windows at certain angles. Most of all, I remembered the way she would stare out the classroom window, her eyes tracking something invisible, something the rest of us were too blind or too busy to see. One afternoon, maybe 3 weeks after the fire, I went back there alone. The gate was standing open, creaking slightly in the wind, and the firefighters had already removed their yellow caution tape, leaving the building exposed and vulnerable. The ground was still scattered with pieces of charred brick and melted plastic, debris that crunched under my shoes as I walked. I entered slowly, hesitantly, like someone walking into a tomb or a crime scene, not sure what I was looking for, but knowing I needed to be there. The classroom where she had studied was almost intact structurally, the desks still in their rows, but the walls were darkened with soot, streaked with black fingers that reached toward the ceiling. In the corner near where my desk had stood, there was a circular burn mark on the floor, perfectly round and dark, as if the fire had paused there deliberately, making a statement, leaving a signature. I stood staring at that mark for a long time, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some meaning in the randomness of destruction. When I finally turned to leave, feeling defeated and empty, I saw my old desk drawer lying on its side near the door, thrown there by firefighters or falling naturally in the chaos. Inside, somehow surviving everything, was the drawing she had given me that Thursday, her final gift. The paper was wrinkled and creased, handled roughly by circumstance, with edges gone dark from heat or smoke, but the image itself was still clear enough to see, clear enough to haunt. The school burning, flames rendered in red and orange crayon, and her name written right in the center of it all. Clara, like a signature on a contract she hadn't chosen to sign. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Couldn't consign it to the trash like it was nothing, like it didn't mean anything. I folded it carefully, placed it inside an envelope to protect it, and took it with me when I left that place for what I thought would be the last time. The years that followed were spent trying to understand what had happened, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Sometimes I convinced myself that she had known somehow, that she had seen her own future written in dreams or visions, that children sometimes have access to knowledge that adults have forgotten how to reach. Other times I told myself it was just terrible coincidence, random chance, the universe's cruel joke with no punchline. But how does a 6-year-old child draw her own ending that way, over and over again, with such consistency and detail? And why did she say it was finished? Using that word like she was completing a task, like she had fulfilled some dark assignment given to her by fate itself. I found myself returning again and again to conversations I'd had with her, replaying them in my mind like old films, searching for clues I'd missed, for warnings I should have heeded. Once, near the end of a school day when the other children had already been picked up, and we were waiting together for her grandmother, she had asked me out of nowhere if fire hurts. The question hung in the air between us, strange and heavy. I told her, yes, of course it hurts, that fire is one of the most painful things a person can experience. She had nodded slowly, thoughtfully, like she was considering my answer carefully, and then she said something that I dismissed at the time, but that haunts me now. She said she didn't think it would hurt, because in her dream, everything just turned into light, warm and bright, and then nothing at all. At the time, I thought it was just a child's imagination, the kind of fantastical thinking that children engage in when trying to understand concepts too big for them. But now when I remember those words, when I hear her small voice saying them in my memory, I feel a different kind of chill run through me, something deeper than ordinary fear, something that touches on mysteries I'm not equipped to understand. After everything that happened, I discovered I couldn't teach anymore, couldn't stand in front of a classroom without seeing her empty desk, without waiting for her to walk through the door with that blue pencil clutched in her hand. I tried once, forcing myself to accept a position at a school in a different neighborhood, thinking maybe a change of scenery would help, that new faces and new walls would let me move forward. I lasted exactly 2 days. On that second day, a little girl in the front row started drawing with a red pencil, the color catching my eye immediately, and I felt my entire body lock up, every muscle going rigid with a panic I couldn't control. My hands started shaking, my vision narrowed to a tunnel, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I asked to leave immediately, mumbled some excuse about being ill, and I never went back. After that, I took a job as an assistant at the city library, a quiet place where almost nobody speaks above a whisper, where the loudest sounds are pages turning and the soft thud of books being shelved. There, surrounded by silence and old paper, it's easier to forget for a few hours at a time, easier to lose myself in cataloging and organizing, in tasks that require no emotional investment. But whenever someone mentions fire, even in passing, even in the most innocent context, I'm transported back to that morning, and I see her face again as clearly as if she were standing in front of me. Those eyes of hers, dark and knowing, that looked at the world differently than other children. They weren't eyes filled with fear. They were the eyes of someone who already knew what was coming, who had accepted it with a grace that no child should ever have to possess. One night, about 2 years after the fire, I dreamed of Clara for the first time since her death. In the dream, she was sitting in the classroom at her usual desk, drawing with that same blue pencil she always carried, the one that seemed like an extension of her hand. But this time, the paper in front of her was completely blank, pristine white, with nothing on it at all, as if the story had finally ended and there was nothing left to draw. She looked up at me with those old eyes, and there was something peaceful in her expression, something settled and complete. She said to me in a voice that was both hers and somehow older, wiser, "Teacher, it's all right now. Everything is as it should be." I woke up crying, tears already streaming down my face before I was fully conscious, my pillow damp and my throat tight. I'm not a man who cries easily, haven't shed tears in years for anything, but that night was different. Something in that dream broke through walls I'd built, touched places I'd kept locked away. I got out of bed in the darkness and retrieved the envelope from where I kept it hidden. I took the drawing out, carefully, as if it might crumble at my touch, and looked at it under the lamp. The colors had faded over time, the reds less vibrant, the blacks turned grey. But her name was still there, still legible, written in her shaky, slightly crooked child's handwriting. The red crayon she had pressed so hard, going over and over the letters until they were embossed into the paper like braille. I placed it carefully in a plastic sleeve to preserve it, then put it inside a folder, which I buried at the back of a drawer, hidden but not forgotten. Sometimes I think about throwing it away, about finally letting it go and moving on with my life, about freeing myself from this paper ghost that keeps me tethered to the past. But I never can. Every time I consider it, something stops my hand, and it feels wrong somehow, like a betrayal, like abandoning her all over again. Once, at a difficult moment when I was wrestling with guilt and memory, a friend of mine who attends church regularly told me that some people can sense things before they happen, that children especially can see what adults have lost the ability to perceive, that they exist closer to some spiritual realm we've forgotten. I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing, don't know if I believe in premonitions or psychic children or messages from beyond, but I know what I saw. I know that she tried to warn us, tried to communicate something desperate and true through the only language she had available to her, the language of pictures and colors. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake some nights staring at the ceiling, is thinking that nobody listened to her, not even me, especially not me. I was the one she trusted, the one she came to with that final drawing, and I failed her completely. Today, the school has been rebuilt, rising from the ashes like something in a myth or fairy tale, though there's nothing magical about it. The new building is beautiful in its way, with fresh paint in cheerful colors, walls that make it look more like a fortress than a school, and modern security systems to prevent what happened before from ever happening again. They named it after an old teacher from the town, someone who had taught generations of children and died peacefully in her sleep at 93. Nobody talks much about the fire anymore, except the oldest residents, the ones who remember that morning and the smell that hung over everything for weeks. But I pass by there occasionally, unable to help myself, drawn back like a pilgrim to a shrine. From outside the fence, I can see the playground where Clara used to play, usually alone, and the window of what was once our classroom, now fitted with colorful curtains that flutter in the breeze. I stand there on the sidewalk, just watching, trying to understand how something so small, one little girl with a blue pencil, could change everything so completely, could reshape the geography of my entire life. Just the other day, a new staff member approached me as I was standing there, recognized me somehow as a former teacher, and struck up a conversation. She told me, her voice uncertain and slightly worried, that sometimes the children at the school draw disturbing things, pictures of fire and dark windows and ominous skies, and she asked if she should be concerned, if she should report it to someone or have the children evaluated. I stood there for a long moment, not knowing what to tell her, not knowing how to explain what I'd learned. Finally, I just said to keep them, to save everything the children make, every drawing and painting and scribbled note. Keep them all safe, I told her, because you never know which ones matter until it's too late. I kept them too, I said, and even now, all these years later, every single time I look at that paper hidden in my drawer, I can smell the smoke all over again, thick and choking, filling my lungs with the scent of endings and warnings unheeded, and a little girl who tried to tell us something we refused to hear. Tentar novamente o. Claude pode cometer erros. Confira sempre as respostas. There's no explanation for it. But there's one thing I learned from all of this, one truth that settled into my bones and won't leave. Sometimes the warning comes, clear as daylight, loud as thunder, but we just don't know how to listen. We're too busy, too rational, too convinced that the world operates only by the rules we understand. I remember clearly the first day I noticed something was wrong, the day everything started to unravel in ways I still can't fully explain. It was an ordinary Tuesday, nothing special about it. Just another anthropology class at the beginning of the semester when everything still feels fresh and possible. I was exhausted, hadn't been sleeping properly for days, my head crowded with assignments and readings and the general anxiety that comes with university life. But what struck me as strange, what pulled me out of my drowsy half-attention, was when I looked down at my notebook and saw notes that I swore, absolutely swore, I hadn't written. The handwriting was similar to mine, close enough that someone else might not notice the difference, but there was something off about it, something that made my skin prickle. The words were slightly crooked, written quickly as if in a hurry, and there was a date written at the top in numbers that seemed to pulse on the page, September 28th. The problem was that on that particular day, it was still only the 23rd, 5 days earlier than the date written there. And below the date, in that same rushed handwriting, were words that made no sense. Power outage, laboratory closed, a student injures his hand. I actually laughed when I first read it, a nervous, uncertain sound that came out louder than I intended, drawing looks from nearby students. I thought someone was playing a prank on me, that one of my classmates had grabbed my notebook when I wasn't looking and written something ridiculous to mess with me. I showed it to my friend sitting in front of me, Raphael, holding the page out like evidence of something I couldn't name. He studied it for a moment, then shrugged and swore I must have written it while half asleep, doodling unconsciously during a boring lecture. But the really strange part, the part that changed everything, was what happened 3 days later. We were in the middle of our practical lab session, surrounded by beakers and microscopes, and the chemical smell that never quite leaves those rooms, when suddenly the lights went out across the entire campus. In the confusion and darkness, our professor stumbled over a cart loaded with reagents and sliced open the palm of his hand on broken glass. In that moment, standing there in the dim emergency lighting, I felt something cold settle in my stomach, something heavier than fear. It wasn't a tragedy, nothing catastrophic or life-changing, but it was there exactly as written. The date, the way it happened, every detail matching perfectly. After that incident, I started paying closer attention to my notebook, checking it obsessively, like someone monitoring their own vital signs. Every day I would flip through to the last pages to see if anything new had appeared, and almost always, disturbingly, there was something. Short notes, brief as telegrams, written like reminders to myself, but dated for days that hadn't happened yet. A student will faint in the auditorium. Rain will interrupt the event on the 2nd. Simple declarative sentences that read like predictions or prophecies, and every single one of them came true. At first, I tried to convince myself I was losing my mind, that stress and lack of sleep were making me paranoid and irrational. Maybe these were just coincidences, improbable but possible. Maybe I had overheard these things somehow and forgotten. My subconscious mind recording information my conscious mind had missed and writing it down when I wasn't paying attention. But there came a day when I could no longer ignore what was happening, when denial became impossible. That week, our class was rehearsing a presentation about indigenous rituals, and we had group meetings every day, filling the classroom with noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of students trying to organize themselves. On Friday evening, after our rehearsal had finally ended and everyone was packing up to leave, I opened my notebook to jot down some speaking notes I wanted to remember. And there it was, written in that familiar, strange handwriting that was mine, but not mine. October 7th. Fall on the stairs of Building 3. Dislocated ankle. Just a single, isolated sentence with no context, no explanation, sitting there in the middle of an otherwise blank page, like an omen or a curse. On Sunday morning, still 2 days before the date written in my notebook, Julia, one of my group members, sent me a text message. She had fallen down the stairs, she wrote, and was at the hospital. Her ankle was dislocated. I didn't even need to check the calendar to confirm what I already knew in my gut. It was October 7th, exactly as predicted, exactly as written in handwriting I couldn't remember forming. After that, I started to feel genuine fear every time I approached my notebook, every time I had to open it for class. But whenever I studied or took notes, whenever I let my attention drift and my mind wander, new pages would appear, filled with that rushed writing. I had no memory of writing any of it, none at all. But my pen was always stained with fresh ink at the tip, evidence of work I couldn't recall doing. I began to notice a pattern in when these predictions appeared. They only showed up when I was very distracted, almost sleeping, sitting through a boring lecture or riding the bus home, in that twilight state between waking and dreaming. I would blink, my eyes closing just for a moment, and when I looked down again there would be new words on the paper, sentences I had no recollection of forming. One afternoon, determined to understand what was happening to me, I decided to conduct an experiment. I left the notebook open on my desk, positioned my phone to record video, and let the camera run, thinking I would catch myself in the act, that I would see my hand moving across the page. But when I played the recording back, nothing unusual had happened. The video showed only me sitting there, completely still and quiet, staring into space. Yet when I checked the notebook afterward, the page was filled with new words, fresh predictions written in ink that was still slightly wet, as if someone had written them during the recording while remaining completely invisible to the camera. That's when I started telling other people about what was happening, desperate for someone to believe me or at least help me understand. My friends laughed, dismissing it as a joke or an elaborate prank. They said I was making it up for attention, trying to create some viral story. One of them even grabbed the notebook from my hands to examine it closely, and he pointed at the ink and said it was too fresh, too new, that I must have written it myself just before showing them. Only one page truly froze me with terror, made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the notebook. It was different from all the other predictions, written without a date. Just a single short sentence pressed hard into the paper, the letters slightly trembling, as if written by someone afraid. "Don't try to warn anyone." I slammed the notebook shut and shoved it deep into my backpack, hiding it like something shameful or dangerous. From that moment on, I started sleeping poorly, tossing through the nights, waking up exhausted. I would dream that I was writing in darkness, my hand moving across paper I couldn't see, forming words I couldn't read. And when I woke in the mornings, my arm would ache, muscles sore as if I had spent hours bent over a desk, writing endlessly through the night. The following week, everything got worse, spiraling towards something I couldn't stop. One afternoon, while I was studying in the library, surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages and whispered conversations, the program coordinator walked past my table and glanced down at my open notebook. He looked at my notes and predictions, and he laughed, actually laughed, telling me I should switch to journalism because I was so good at guessing the news before it happened. I tried to explain to him that this wasn't a joke, that something genuinely strange was happening, and I was frightened. But he didn't really listen, just patted my shoulder and walked away smiling. But then I saw it, written on the last filled page, a date that made my entire body go cold. October 14th, fire in the dormitory. I read it over and over, maybe 10 times, hoping the words would change or disappear or reveal themselves to be something else. But they stayed the same. The dormitory was where I lived. My room was on the upper floor, and I knew with terrible certainty that the notebook had never been wrong, not once. I tried showing it to the coordinator, practically chasing him down the hallway, but he laughed again and told me I needed more sleep, that I was clearly stressed and imagining things. I showed my friends, held the page in front of their faces, but nobody believed me. They couldn't see what I saw, couldn't feel what I felt. But I knew with every cell in my body that the notebook never lied. In the days that followed, I became paranoid, jumping at shadows, flinching at ordinary sounds. Any smell of smoke, no matter how faint or innocent, sent me into a panic, my heart racing, my breath coming short. I barely slept, lying awake, listening for sounds of danger, watching for signs, until finally, inevitably, in the early morning hours of October 14th, I woke to the sound of people screaming in the corridor outside my room, voices high and terrified, cutting through the darkness. When I opened my door, the smoke was already descending from the ceiling in thick grey waves, moving like something alive and purposeful. It was coming from the floor below, rising up through the stairwell, and the smell was overwhelming, acrid and chemical, burning things and melting plastic combining into something that made my eyes water and my throat close. The fire alarm went off moments later, its shrill cry filling the building. But people were already pounding on doors, shouting for everyone to evacuate, voices cracking with urgency and fear. I grabbed my backpack, only that, nothing else mattered in that moment, and ran out into the hallway in my bare feet, not even stopping to find shoes. The corridor was choked with smoke, visibility dropping to almost nothing, the air hot and thick and hard to breathe. I followed the sound of voices, using them like a beacon, stumbling toward the stairwell, feeling heat rising from below like opening an oven door. When I finally made it outside, gasping and coughing, there were already firefighters on scene, their trucks parked at angles, lights flashing red and blue across crying faces. There were ambulances, people wrapped in blankets sitting on the grass, others still emerging from the building with blackened faces and shocked expressions. I stood there frozen, staring up at the building that had been my home, watching smoke pour from windows on the second floor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My notebook was still with me, still in my backpack pressed against my back, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was not coincidence, could never be explained away as chance. The date, the location, everything had been written there before it happened, a warning I couldn't make anyone hear. The fire had started in a room on the second floor, investigators said later, caused by a short circuit in an old fan, wiring that had finally given out. Nobody died, thank whatever gods or forces govern these things, but 2 students were hospitalized for smoke inhalation, and the entire dormitory was condemned for weeks, while repairs were made and safety inspections conducted. When I could finally breathe normally again, when my hands stopped shaking enough to function, I sat down on the damp grass and pulled the notebook from my bag with trembling fingers. The cover was scorched, blackened around the edges, and several pages at the front had burned partially, their corners turned to ash. But the strange thing, the thing that made no sense at all, was that all the pages following the prediction about the dormitory fire were completely blank, pristine, and unmarked, no trace of ink anywhere. I sat there staring at those empty pages for a long time, waiting for something to appear, some new prediction or warning or message, but nothing came. The notebook had gone silent, its strange prophecies ended, leaving me alone with questions I would never be able to answer, and a story no one would ever fully believe. In the days that followed, nothing appeared either, no new predictions or warnings to guide me or terrify me. I returned the notebook to my backpack, tucked it away like something dangerous that needed containing, but I started noticing something strange, something I couldn't ignore. Whenever I picked it up, whenever my fingers made contact with its cover, I felt a tingling sensation in my hand, like a mild electric shock running through my nerves, especially concentrated in the parts where the pages had burned. The sensation wasn't painful exactly, but it was unsettling, wrong somehow, like touching something that existed between states of being. After about a week of this, I tried to use it normally again, attempted to write regular class notes the way I had before everything changed, but my pen wouldn't mark the paper at all. The ink just sat there on the surface, refusing to sink in, refusing to leave any trace. The same pen worked perfectly fine in other notebooks, flowing smoothly across normal pages, but in that notebook it was as if the paper had developed some kind of invisible coating, some barrier that rejected ordinary writing. One night, walking back from an evening class through streets lit by flickering street lamps, I decided to open the notebook again, driven by curiosity or masochism or some combination of both. I sat on the bed in my temporary room, the small space they'd assigned me after the dormitory fire, and began flipping through the pages, slowly, carefully, just to see if anything remained or if new predictions had somehow appeared without my knowledge. When I reached the section near the burned pages, my heart began to race, accelerating with a fear I'd almost forgotten. In the middle of what had been blank white pages, a new line had appeared by itself, materializing right there in the center, as if someone invisible had just finished writing it while I watched. 2 words only, stark and simple and terrifying, not finished. The shock was so sudden and complete that the notebook fell from my hands, tumbling to the floor, where it landed open to that page. I sat frozen on the bed, staring down at it, waiting for the letters to fade or disappear or reveal themselves as some trick of light and shadow, but they remained exactly where they were, solid and real and impossible to deny. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and took a photo, needing evidence, needing proof that I wasn't hallucinating or losing my grip on reality. But when I looked at the image on my screen, it had come out blurred and distorted, as if the camera had focused on something else entirely, something I couldn't see with my naked eyes. Still, you could just barely make out the words if you looked closely enough, squinted at the smudged pixels. The next morning, desperate for someone else to witness what was happening, I went to find Raphael and show him. When I opened the notebook in front of him, flipping to that page with fingers that still trembled slightly, the page was completely empty again, pristine white with no trace of writing anywhere. And when I checked my phone to show him the photo I'd taken, scrolling frantically through my gallery, that image had vanished too, deleted by no hand I could identify. From that point forward, I stopped trying to interact with the notebook, stopped opening it, or touching it, or even thinking about it if I could help it. I put it in a box, sealed it shut, and hid it at the very bottom of my suitcase, buried under clothes and books and all the ordinary objects of daily life. But every once in a while, I still feel it vibrating through all those layers, pulsing with some energy I don't understand. I know it sounds crazy, sounds like the ravings of someone who's lost touch with reality, but it's as if the paper itself has developed a life of its own, some kind of consciousness or awareness. Every year in October, without fail, it comes back, makes its presence known in ways I can't ignore. Just recently, just a few days ago, in fact, I opened my suitcase to grab a sweater I needed. And there it was, sitting right on top of everything despite being buried at the bottom. The cover darker than before, more worn and weathered, as if years had passed instead of months. I tried flipping through it with reluctant fingers, and at the end of the very last page there was a new phrase written in that familiar handwriting, short and cryptic. October 29th, return. I don't know what that means, can't even begin to guess what it's trying to tell me. But ever since I read those words, I've been waking up every night feeling like someone is watching me from the shadows of my room. And there's always a smell of smoke in the air, persistent and acrid, even though there's no fire anywhere, no rational source for that scent that clings to everything I own. I started dreaming about that bus on a Thursday night, the images arriving in my sleep with vivid clarity that felt more like memory than imagination. It was red, bright, vibrant red, the kind of bus that ran the route between downtown and the reservoir neighborhood on the city's edge. In the dream, I watched it descending a narrow road, twisting through curves cut into hillsides, and suddenly it lost control, the driver fighting the wheel as physics took over. I saw it fall, tumbling and rolling multiple times as it dropped, disappearing down below into a ravine I couldn't see the bottom of. I woke up with my heart pounding against my ribs, my sheets soaked with sweat, completely unable to understand why that dream had felt so devastatingly real, so much more than just my imagination conjuring random scenarios. On that first night, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just anxiety manifesting in visual form. I've always been an anxious person, prone to worry and catastrophic thinking, and any strong image tends to lodge itself in my mind and replay endlessly. But the same dream returned on Friday night, identical in every detail, like watching the same movie twice. The red bus, the screaming sound of failed brakes, the screams of passengers, the terrible impact, and one image that stayed burned into my consciousness even after I woke. A man wearing a yellow shirt, trying desperately to break the window glass with his elbow, his face contorted with effort and terror. I could see his features clearly, could read the desperation in his eyes, and I woke up screaming into my pillow, my throat raw. On the third night, Saturday, the dream came again, and it was worse than before, more intense and suffocating, because this time it felt like I was actually inside the bus, experiencing it firsthand, rather than watching from some omniscient distance. I felt the vehicle swaying beneath me, felt the acrid smell of burning brakes filling my nostrils, and most terrifying of all, I felt the fear of someone who already knew exactly what was about to happen, who understood with perfect clarity that death was seconds away. I woke up crying, tears streaming down my face before I was even fully conscious, with the absolute conviction that this wasn't just a dream anymore, wasn't just my subconscious processing random fears. It felt like someone or something was trying to warn me, sending me a message through the only channel available, begging me to pay attention before it was too late. On Sunday morning, while I was still groggy and disturbed from another night of broken sleep, my cousin sent me a text message saying she was heading to the neighboring city to visit her boyfriend. We're very close, closer than most cousins. Grew up together like sisters, sharing secrets and dreams and all the small intimacies of childhood. She always takes the bus because she doesn't own a car, never learned to drive, depends on public transportation for everything. I asked her casually which route she was taking, trying to keep my voice light and normal, and when she responded with the bus line number, my stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. It was the red bus line, the exact one from my dreams. I tried to act normal, tried to keep the panic out of my voice. But I could hear it trembling as I spoke, could feel my hands shaking as I held the phone. I told her about the dream, about 3 consecutive nights of watching that red bus fall, about the passenger in the yellow shirt trying to break the window. I begged her not to go, to wait for another day, to make up some excuse, anything to keep her off that bus. She laughed, a sound that cut through me like broken glass. She said I was becoming paranoid, that it was just coincidence, nothing more. "Dreams are dreams, cousin," she said dismissively. "And anyway, I'm wearing that yellow shirt Guy gave me. It'll bring me luck." When she said yellow shirt, I felt my legs go weak beneath me, felt all the strength drain out of my body like water from a broken vessel. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping in vacuum. I begged her again, pleaded with everything I had, but she didn't take me seriously, couldn't understand the certainty that gripped me. She said she was already running late and hung up before I could say anything else, before I could find the words that might have changed her mind. I spent the rest of that day in agony, unable to focus on anything, checking my phone every single minute, waiting for her message saying she'd arrived safely. But around 3 in the afternoon, messages started circulating through the city's group chats, spreading like wildfire through our small, interconnected community. Accident on Lookout Road. Bus fell into the ravine. My entire body locked up, every muscle going rigid with horror and terrible knowing. I didn't need to read the rest, didn't need confirmation of what I already knew in my bones. It was the same bus line as hers, had to be. The universe doesn't send warnings that specific without reason. I called everyone I could think of, my fingers fumbling with the phone, dropping it twice. Nobody knew anything yet. Information was scattered and confused. When they finally confirmed that the bus belonged to the same company, that it was her route, I felt the ground open beneath me, felt myself falling into the same ravine that had swallowed that red bus. The news report said the driver had lost control on a curve, the physics of speed, and weight and friction conspiring against him, and the vehicle had plunged approximately 20 meters down the steep embankment. There were deaths, there were injuries, and images of the crumpled bus appeared on every local news site, spreading across social media like a plague. I recognized the red paint job immediately, recognized the shattered windows, every detail matching what I had seen in my dreams with photographic precision. My mother held me while I shook, but I couldn't stop repeating the same words over and over like a broken record. I warned her. I dreamed it. I saw this happen. She tried to calm me, stroking my hair and saying there was no way I could have known, that dreams don't predict the future, that this was just terrible coincidence. But inside myself, I knew better, knew with absolute certainty that I had been given knowledge I couldn't use, shown a future I couldn't change. I had felt it coming, had seen every detail, and even with that knowledge, I hadn't been able to prevent anything at all. That night I didn't sleep at all, couldn't even close my eyes without seeing it all again. And when I finally did drift off for a few minutes near dawn, what I saw wasn't the bus or the accident or the falling or the impact. It was an image of my cousin wearing that yellow shirt, sitting near the window where I'd seen the desperate man, and she was looking directly at me with an expression that seemed to be asking for forgiveness, apologizing for not believing, for not listening, when listening might have saved her life. The next day, I went to the hospital in the city, moving like a ghost through streets that felt unreal. I don't really remember the journey. Can't recall the details of how I got there. I only remember walking as if I was outside my own body, as if my physical form was moving forward while my mind remained stuck in that Sunday morning, frozen in the moment before everything shattered. There were so many people crowded in front of the Santa Casa hospital, families waiting for news, curious onlookers drawn by tragedy, press with cameras and microphones hunting for stories. The sound of ambulance sirens came from somewhere in the distance, and that smell of gasoline and wet earth seemed to hang in the air permanently, refusing to dissipate. When they finally called my cousin's name, when they gestured for her family to come forward, I already knew what they were going to say. Even so, I went in, forced my feet to carry me through those doors. She hadn't survived the fall, hadn't made it out of that crumpled red bus. And I was left holding the weight of dreams that had shown me everything, but given me no power to change any of it at all. They said she was found near the window. Maybe she tried to protect herself, or someone else. But it was one small detail that shattered me completely. She had her yellow blouse with her, not on, but folded neatly on her lap, covered in dust. I couldn't process it at first. My hands trembled as I tried to understand why. Why would she take it off? Why that color, the same one that had appeared in my dream? The days that followed felt unreal, like I had been torn out of life itself. People spoke, but their words dissolved before reaching me. I kept seeing it. The red bus, the glass exploding, the yellow blouse. Some of my family said it was just coincidence, that I dreamt it because I knew how dangerous that road was, that the mind sometimes stitches together fear and memory. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. But in those 3 nights, the dream always ended at the exact same moment, when the window shattered and the man in the yellow shirt fell through. Later, I saw the photos from the crash. A reporter mentioned that one passenger had tried to break the glass and was found just below where she was. He was wearing a dark jacket, and over his body, the report said, was a yellow blouse that wasn't his. That was when I stopped trying to explain anything, because reason had already left the room. For a while, I wrote down every dream, hoping maybe I could prevent something. But nothing like that ever happened again. None of the dreams felt like warnings anymore. Still, even today, when I see a red bus passing by, I freeze. I stare at it, trying to decide if it was all coincidence or if someone was trying to show me what was coming. And the worst part is that I still hear that sound, the crack of shattering glass, echoing faintly inside me. Sometimes, when I'm distracted, I swear it's there, and for a heartbeat it feels like it's all happening again. Since that day, I haven't set foot on a bus, red or otherwise. And when someone tells me they dreamed of something bad, I can't bring myself to say it's just a dream, because I know what it means to see what's coming and be powerless to stop it. Some dangers arrive without warning, but that one I smelled before it came. It was a hot morning, clear skies, the kind of heat that makes the highway shimmer like it's breathing. I was already retired, but I still took small trips with my son, just to keep the engine in my veins alive. Once the road becomes part of you, it never truly leaves. I woke up early, had my coffee, and went to the garage. He was already there, cheerful, checking the tires. We were hauling feed to a nearby farm just a couple of hours away. Nothing unusual. But as soon as I stepped outside, I caught that scent. The smell of rain. Not a single cloud in the sky, only that piercing blue that hurts to look at. And yet the air was heavy, damp, full of that same warning fragrance I'd learned to fear. I stopped, hand on the gate, breathing slow. I knew what it meant. I'd felt it before. Once, back in the early 80s, just hours before a bus overturned right in front of my truck. Another time before a friend lost control on the highway and never made it home. Since then, I'd learned to respect the message behind that smell. Let's wait, I told him. Today isn't good for the road. My son laughed, called it superstition, said it hadn't rained in weeks, that the sky was too clear to bring trouble. I insisted, but the truck was loaded, the papers signed, his excitement already rolling forward. And truthfully, I missed it too, the hum of the wheels, the endless line of asphalt ahead. So we went. At first, the hot wind brushed my face, almost strong enough to dry the omen away. But the scent stayed with me, trapped deep inside, no matter how far we drove. I tried not to think about it, but some warnings cling to the soul, refusing to be forgotten. I leaned my arm out the window, adjusted my cap, and let him drive. The boy had a natural gift, smoother hands than I ever had at his age. We cruised along nearly 30 kilometers of clean asphalt, sun blazing, the kind of heat that turns the air into waves. The smell faded and returned, teasing us like the wind itself was playing. Then, near a wide curve, the air grew thick again, and this time the silence followed, an eerie stillness. No birds, no hum of tires, just the low growl of the engine. I looked ahead, and every hair on my body rose. A car was coming toward us in our lane. From a distance, I could already tell it was moving too fast, swerving out of control. I barely had time to shout my son's name. He tried to pull over, but the car struck the front of the truck sideways. The sound, sharp, final. After that, everything blurs. I remember the windshield shattering, the smell of diesel mixing with that same heavy rain scent, thick and suffocating. I remember trying to move my legs and feeling nothing. When I opened my eyes again, someone was tearing at the door, firefighters, sirens. My son's body lay covered with a grey tarp on the other side of the road. It hadn't even started raining. I sat on the shoulder, my arm throbbing, my head ringing. None of it felt real. The truck was still smoking, the air heavy with the smell of burnt oil and hot metal. But above it all, that same scent lingered, the smell of rain, stronger than ever, as if it had fused with me. The firefighters spoke, but their voices were only shapes moving in the noise. I just stared at the top, at the stillness beneath it. My son, the same boy who learned to change tires beside me, who laughed at my old habits, who promised he'd one day convince me to leave the road behind. I kept asking myself why. How could something so senseless happen under a clear sky on a straight road? They said later the other driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. But I already knew. That wasn't the whole story. I knew the moment the smell came back. I stayed in the hospital a few days, my shoulder a few stitches. The body healed quickly, but the rest never did. When I returned home, the garage was exactly as we'd left it. His helmet hung from the nail, gloves on the bench, that old radio in the corner, and silence filling everything else. It took me weeks to open the truck door. When I finally did, the air inside felt frozen in time. Oil, dust, and the faint trace of rain, distant now, like a memory that no longer belonged to me. I sat behind the wheel, turned the key just to hear the engine one last time, but my chest tightened and I switched it off. After that, I stopped driving. The truck stayed under a tarp until a neighbor offered to buy it. I sold it. It hurt less than I expected, maybe because part of me was already gone with it. For months, everything reminded me of that day, a tire bursting on the street, the rumble of a truck passing by, even the smell of wet earth after a shower. but it was never the same. The true scent, the one that came from nowhere under a cloudless sky, never returned. At first I thought it was punishment, then I thought it was mercy. But as the years passed, I understood. The warning had left with him. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. We spend our lives trying to name what we feel, to make sense of what the heart knows before the mind can speak. But some things defy explanation. There were nights I wished for that smell again, not out of fear, but longing, just to know someone was still watching over me from above. But it never came back. And somehow, that silence became the answer. Even now, all these years later, whenever the sky closes in with clouds, whenever the atmosphere shifts and changes, I stop whatever I'm doing. I go completely still, breathing deeply, waiting for something I can't name. It's automatic, involuntary, like a reflex I can't control. And when the air becomes too dry, when the wind carries nothing but emptiness, I understand the message just the same, read the silence like someone reading absence in a letter. Today, I live in a small place near an old road where almost nobody passes anymore, where the world moves slowly, if it moves at all. Sometimes in the late afternoon, you can see trucks descending carefully, their headlights already on even though the sun hasn't quite set. And the sound of their tires carries far across the empty fields, fading into distance. In those moments, I close my eyes and imagine him there in the cab, my father waving goodbye through the window, his hand raised in that gesture I've seen 1,000 times in memory. I've tried to explain this to my daughter, tried to put into words what I experienced, but it's difficult, maybe impossible. She thinks it's just memory playing tricks, that my mind is mixing up the smell of rain with longing and grief, creating connections that don't really exist. Maybe she's right. Maybe it is just the way trauma reshapes our understanding of cause and effect. But inside myself, in that place where certainty lives beyond doubt, I know what I experienced was real. The smell always came before, never after, arriving like a messenger bearing news of what was coming. And on the day he left us forever, the day he died on that road he'd traveled so many times, the air went completely silent, mute, offering no warning at all. Since then, the world can be falling apart outside my windows. Storms can be gathering on every horizon. And I feel nothing. No premonition, no advance notice of disaster. It's as if the road and I made some kind of bargain, signed a contract written in loss and sorrow. The road took what I loved most in this world, took my father from me without mercy or explanation, and in exchange it stripped away my gift of sensing what was coming, that ability to smell change on the wind before it arrived. All that's left now is silence. And this habit I can't break, this compulsion to look up at skies that are too clear, too perfect, waiting for something. Anything to make me feel that smell again, that warning that used to arrive like clockwork, but it never comes back, never returns, leaving me stranded in a present that offers no glimpses of the future. I always say there are things on the road that people shouldn't see, sights that break something in you that can't be repaired. And that particular night was one of those times, one of those moments when the ordinary world cracks open and shows you what's underneath. I was coming down Highway 153 around 2 in the morning, that dead hour when the world feels abandoned and unreal. The stretch between Soledad and Erikim is particularly desolate, dark and empty, in ways that make you feel like the last person alive. I was tired, bone-tired from too many hours behind the wheel, but I could still manage a bit more, could push through for another hour or two before I'd need to stop. The radio was crackling with static, and I kept it on low volume, just loud enough to keep me from falling asleep at the wheel, the voices and music providing company in the darkness. The fog started closing in out of nowhere, appearing suddenly the way it sometimes does in those regions. It was that low-lying fog that looks like frozen smoke rolling across the pavement in waves. and I reduced my speed immediately because that section is full of blind curves and narrow shoulders, places where one mistake means death. That's when I saw the light, just a small point of illumination in all that darkness. I was driving down Highway 153, deep in the night, when I saw a faint, wavering light on the shoulder. I thought it was a broken-down car, but as I got closer, I flashed my high beams. My blood ran cold. It was a child, no older than 8, holding a lantern and just staring at me, standing there completely alone in the fog. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I couldn't. I pulled over, grabbed a flashlight and called out, but there was nothing. No child, no lantern, no footprints. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I was shaken, but I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. 2 days later, I saw the news, a horrific school van accident on that exact same stretch of road. And then they showed the photos of the victims. I recognized one of them immediately. It was the child from the roadside. I had never seen anything like that before, had never experienced something that challenged my understanding of reality so completely. And the worst part was that nobody really believed me when I tried to tell them. I told a fellow trucker, Gerson, who runs that route regularly, and he just laughed and said I should have slept before driving. That exhaustion makes people see things that aren't there, hallucinate from lack of rest. But it wasn't sleep deprivation or tiredness or my imagination. I remember every detail with perfect clarity, the brightness of that swinging lantern, the child's clothing, the way those eyes looked at me with knowledge no child should possess. It's a clean memory, sharp-edged and precise, as if it happened yesterday instead of years ago. At first I even tried to doubt myself, tried to convince myself I'd imagined it or misremembered. I went back and researched the accident, looked up the school's name, checked the timeline of when the van left and when it crashed, and everything matched perfectly, every detail confirmed. The accident occurred about 4 hours after I passed through that area. The children were heading to a field trip in Erikim, excited for a day away from routine, not knowing they'd never arrive. They said the driver fell asleep at the wheel and drifted into the oncoming lane, a moment of human weakness that ended everything. But nobody could explain what I saw hours before it happened. Nobody could account for that child standing on the roadside in the dark. A few months later, I finally returned to that road, my heart tight with apprehension but necessity overcoming fear. It was a delivery to Passo Fundo, and there was no other reasonable route. No way to avoid that stretch without adding hours to the trip. I spent the entire day thinking about it, dreading nightfall. When darkness started settling over the landscape, I was already tense, my shoulders rigid, my hands gripping the wheel too tight, watching for lights that shouldn't be there, for children who shouldn't exist. I turned on the high beams and started counting the kilometers, just to know when I'd reach that stretch. It must have been close to midnight when I finally did. The curve, the grass on both sides, the narrow shoulder, everything looked exactly the same. A light drizzle had started, and the windshield began to fog. I switched on the defroster, and that's when the chill ran through me. In the rearview mirror, far behind, a small light flickered. At first, I thought it was just a car in the distance, but it was too weak, unsteady. And it wasn't moving. It was right where I'd seen that child months before. My hands tightened around the wheel. For a moment, I thought about stopping, but fear froze me in place. I pressed down on the pedal and kept going. When I looked again, the light was still there, blinking softer each time until it vanished. I drove on, my palms slick with sweat. The air inside the cab felt heavy, too thick to breathe. The radio crackled with static, the engine sputtered, and everything seemed to happen at once. I reached the next rest stop at dawn, parked, and sat there for several minutes before I could even open the door. I could tell myself it was a reflection, a motorcycle's headlight, anything rational. But I knew that place. The same curve, the same shoulder, the same faint, trembling lantern. After that night, I started noticing something strange. Whenever someone mentioned that part of the road, the accident, the curve, they always spoke of the same thing. Workers cleaning the highway said that sometimes, late at night, they saw a flickering light among the trees, as if someone were searching for something. A highway patrol officer once told a friend of mine that they'd received calls from drivers reporting a child by the roadside. But every time they went to look, there was nothing there. These stories travel among truckers like whispers, half believed, half dismissed. Only those who've seen it understand. Months later, I went back during the day, determined to face whatever truth was left. I parked, stepped out, and walked along the shoulder, scanning the brush and the slope for anything. A toy, a mark on the ground, any sign that what I saw was real. There was nothing, just silence and the hum of the wind through the weeds. Still, that stretch of road has never felt the same. Even now, when I'm driving at night, the faint flash of a light in my mirror makes my blood run cold. Maybe it's just another car, maybe a reflection, but my mind always drifts back there to that trembling glow at the edge of the dark. I've thought about sharing this story before, but I always stopped, afraid it would sound like madness. After all these years, though, I've learned something. Sometimes the road shows you what's coming, and it's we who fail to understand. I don't know if that light was a warning, a plea, or just the way fate whispered before it struck. All I know is that since that night I can't see a flickering lantern without thinking of her. And every time I pass that curve, even in daylight, I ease the truck down, glance toward the shoulder, and hope to see nothing at all. But sometimes, just for a breath in the mirror's edge, it still feels like someone is standing there, holding a light,